Boo, ba ba, ba ba ba, boo, ba ba. Who's the man who will speak the truth? Boo, ba ba, ba ba ba, boo, ba ba. Lone candles, that man. Who's the man who will bring light into your life? Boo, ba ba, ba ba ba, boo. Ba-ba, lone candles, that man. Who's the man who digs through human excrement to present you the gems? Boo, ba-ba, ba-boo, ba-boo, ba-ba, lone candles, that man. Who's the man who kinda sometimes knows what he's talking about? Boo, ba-ba, ba-ba-da-boo. Ba-ba, lone candles, that man. Who's the man who has a scatterbrained, low IQ, and weak memory recall? Boo, ba-ba, ba-ba-da-boo, ba-ba, lone candles, that man. Oh, hello. Welcome to Lone Candle Live. Today is another beautiful episode of the famous series that roughly, I assume, millions of people have watched, and that the counters of the views are wrong. ReplyGuying with Lone Candle, where I discuss some of my not pointless at all conversations with random people on the internet. Now, today's technically not really reply guying because it's my post. So really someone reply guy me. But I'm going to still fold this under with reply guying with Lone Candle. All right. So of course I have an unnecessarily lengthy post here, and I'm going to read it all. Now this is actually a post I wrote. So if you're really curious to learn everything I wrote about this, you'll have to go find it on Medium or on YouTube or on my podcast. And you can get the full thing, but you'll get a little taste of it here. All right, so here's what I posted with, of course, the link to my Medium article. It's probably also on Substack, unless this was before I started Substack, because I didn't just write this. Anywho, the issue with capital gains taxes isn't the lower rate, but that many people don't pay them at all. A capital gains tax is only applied when the item is sold. The wealthy can avoid this tax by never selling the asset. If they need money, they can use other income sources or take loans using the stock as collateral. Loans are not taxed, and the interest rate on the loans is lower than the cost of a tax. So even without selling, the wealthy can spend their capital gains like it's regular income, but don't have to pay taxes on it. At death, those assets are transferred to heirs, and the now deceased never paid a tax. You would think that the money is then paid through an estate tax or when the heirs sell the assets, but this is not the case. First, the estate tax has a very high starting threshold, so much wealth is sheltered before even reaching the tax level. And second, there are tools like trusts that the wealthy use to legally protect their wealth from being taxed. Their wealth goes from the trusts to their heirs without being taxed. The heirs can then also never sell the assets and therefore never pay a capital gains tax. However, even if they did sell the assets, they would still not pay a tax on the capital gains. The United States uses a stepped-up basis to determine what counts as a gain. When we decide how much someone gained from owning an asset, we take how much they sold it for minus how much they paid for it. The initial cost of the asset is called the cost basis. You'd think that when the heir sells inherited assets, they would use the original cost for the cost basis. But thanks to stepped up, their cost basis for selling is the value of the asset when they inherited it. So what I'm saying here is they literally can sell it, actually sell, have a huge capital gain from when it was first purchased and pay no taxes because, well, once you inherit it, the cost basis is reset. And so not only can you have all this gain, and remember, a lot of the wealthy's gains are not through income, it's through capital appreciation. So they can have all this gain, which they can use as income, either because, well, they know they got that, so they could use other money more freely because of those gains, or they can take loans on it, which allows them to not have to pay a tax. So not only can they use that in life as income and not pay taxes, which is extremely unfair, they can never pay taxes by never selling or by their inheritors selling. Because when their inheritors sell, they don't pay taxes because the capital gains are reset, which is nonsense. And of course, the estate tax has massive holes in it, and so the estate tax is not very effective at countering this. So I posted a post about that, and I spent $10 to force people to see it, wasting my precious little money. Yeah, but and luckily I got 2 people to talk to me about it. Luckily or unlucky, it's hard to say. They are both appear to be honest in their conversation, so that's good. So first we had Jen, who I don't have no idea who Jen is. She said, nope, working people with a 401k get capital gains on their retirement, so nope. Okay. Didn't really seem to deal with any of the issues I was talking about. She's just talking about the 401k, which I wasn't talking about 401ks. So 401ks, if it's a regular 401k, you get to put money straight from your salary into the 401k without paying a tax on it. However, later after you retire, when you sell it, you actually pay regular income tax on all of it, not just the gain, but the income you skipped earlier, the regular income you skipped earlier that you donated to it. And so it is true that the 401k isn't like a big cheat. And but that's wasn't what I was talking about. I didn't say anything about 401k here. So that's 100% irrelevant to anything I'm talking about. I remember 401k, if you don't make that much, the limits, there's a yearly limit on how much you can put into a 401k. If you don't make that much, those limits might seem pretty big. But to the super wealthy, they can easily fill up their 401k every year and have tons left over. So the vast majority of their wealth, unless something weird happened, is not going to be in their 401k, which means the 401k is 100% irrelevant to what I'm talking about here. Yeah. So I responded, working people already pay taxes on their 401k capital gains, and they pay it at working income rates, not the lower capital gains rates. However, many of the wealthy never pay taxes on many of their gains. It's a giant loophole that is unfair and bad for the deficit. I don't want to soak the rich. I just want them paying taxes on their income like everyone else. Yeah, so, I mean, obviously I'm adding a little stuff here, but I'm not a soak the rich guy. Some people are talking about more taxes, and it's because they don't think billionaires should exist. It's they want to soak the rich. They are socialists and believe, well, in socialism you need to have high taxes for these deep socialist reasons. Nah, I'm a capitalist. I understand we need basic regulation and we need basic, limited but basic welfare. But, even a pretty extreme libertarian understands that there should be taxes. I mean, by definition, a libertarian isn't an anarchist. They think government should exist and government has to be funded. And so you got to find a way to tax. We're taxing either way. And so you want to tax in a way that is as fair as possible and that does the least amount of damage as possible. And so it can do damage, one, just from taking money from you. Obviously, if I make $100 and I have to give $10 to the government, in some way I was damaged by $10. But also by the incentives that taxes create. If taxes disincentivize behavior that is good for the world, good for the country, good for people, well, that's not good either. And so you want to try to minimize that. And the system we have now, the super wealthy have tons and tons and tons of income that isn't taxed at all or taxed very little. And that's just really not fair. If you take $500 for someone who's really poor, well, they're starving. They're now starving. If you take $500 from someone in the lower middle class, well, that sucks. But they'll be okay. If you take $1 million from someone that's a billionaire, it's nothing. It makes zero. It has zero effect on their life at all. And so you do have to look at how taxes affect people's lives. You know, it's not, oh, everyone pays $5. And, oh, that's fair because the number is the same. No, what matters is the amount of money or how it affects their lives. What matters is how it affects their lives. And taking a lot of money for people who have tons of money just affects their lives a lot less than taking a lot smaller amount than those who have less. And so there's good reason for good basic fairness reasons for, you know, the wealthy to pay a lot of the taxes. And we're a very unequal society. So you'd expect in a very unequal society, a lot of taxes be paid by the wealthy. And while they do pay more than everyone else, especially the super wealthy, you know, if you look at how much they have, they're definitely not paying their fair share. And it's for reasons, you know, that I'm talking about in this piece I wrote here. All right. So Jen responded, nope, you don't, not until you withdraw from it. And nope, you don't pay taxes on money you don't actually have, which is what stocks are, and capital gains are not income. Okay, so here she's made, I mean, it's not 100% clear, but you don't pay taxes on until you withdraw from it. And so she's saying you don't pay on unrealized gains, basically what she's saying. Meaning you don't pay taxes until you sell it. Okay. And nope, you don't pay taxes on money you don't actually have. She's saying because you haven't sold it yet, you don't actually have the money. And capital gains, she means unrealized capital gains, are not income. Okay, so it's weird because I explained it in this article, but I also explained it in the post she's responding to. And she doesn't seem to be disputing the facts. She seems to just be ignorant of the facts. And even though I lay them up here. So that's obviously very frustrating. But, yeah. So but it's a very common argument that, well, no, capital gains aren't income yet because you'd have to sell them. So first of all, I'm not for taxing unrealized capital gains. This article here, I don't argue for that. I actually mention it and I explicitly say, while it could be possible, it's not what I favor. And so, you know, I don't know who she's talking to, but it's not really me. And the reason capital gains are income, at least think of two off the top of my head, is one, you are wealthier. You can see that. And knowing that, it gives you more freedom to spend other stuff because you're like, well, this gain went up, and knowing it went up means it's more likely, even if it falls later, it's more likely in the wrong going to be up because I've seen that it will go up that much. And so you can have more confidence to spend. And by the way, this is shown in the economic literature that when the stock market's up, people spend more. And so they spend more because they know they have more. So it is a real income and allows you to spend other things. Another is, as I explained in the post I actually posted here, the super wealthy will get loans. So they literally are getting loans rather than paying taxes. They'd rather pay interest to a bank because it's a less amount of money than taxes for the American people. And so, no, when that goes up, it's easier for them to get loans, and they get loans at lower interest rate because they have more collateral. And so they are actually using it as income and not paying it on taxes. Another thing she's ignoring is that, well, when the heirs get it, they can sell it, actually have the cash on hand. She says you don't actually have the cash. No, I literally described you having cash on hand in the post above because of stepped up basis, the heirs can sell it, pay no tax on it at all. So you do have cash in hand. Anyways, I said, yes, you pay money on it when you withdraw it, and you are forced to start withdrawing. I'm talking about the 401k. So I think I may have been confused because at this point she might be done talking about the 401k. I don't know. But it's very clear to me. My response here is talking about the 401k. So it's possible we talked past each other a little bit here. Anyways, yes, you pay money on it when you withdraw it, and you are forced to start withdrawing it at a certain age. That's the 401k. Either way, you do pay taxes on the gains. The wealthy who make tons of money often never pay money on those gains. So what I'm saying here, I think I earlier decided I want to zoom in more when I'm doing these. Whoops. The wealthy who pay tons of taxes often never pay money on gains. What was I talking about? Now I've distracted myself. You pay money on it when you withdraw it, and you are forced to start withdrawing. Okay, so I'm talking about the 401k. Yeah, and so, yes, regular people investing in their 401ks do pay tax on it. If it's a regular 401k, you're forced to withdraw and then pay taxes on the withdrawal. If it's in a Roth 401k, which is another type of retirement account, if it's in a Roth account, you actually pay taxes beforehand. Although then, in a Roth, you don't pay taxes on the gains. But again, you can only put a certain amount in a Roth a year. So that's very limited, and it's not what I'm talking about here. And so, essentially, regular people pay money on their taxes. They pay money on their gains, unless it's in a Roth, which they can only put so much money in a Roth in the first place, while the super wealthy don't. And so I also said capital gains are real income. You are actually wealthier when you make them. You can take loans with them and spend that money. There's a well-known effect that people spend more when the stock market is up because they know they have more. The wealthy can die and have their children inherit the stock and its gains. And then the children sell them all at once and pay zero capital gains taxes. So now the inheritors have cash from all those gains that they can spend on whatever they want. And no one ever paid taxes for the income from those gains. Okay, she said, yep. And when wealthy close their accounts, they pay taxes too. Yeah, that's not true. And so she's just ignoring what I'm saying. It's not clicking. But what she's saying is factually wrong. So I don't know what she's talking about. Yes, when the wealthy have a 401k, which they could also have a 401k, they will pay money on that just like when regular people do. But on all the money that they can have outside of that, they can just never sell, or the inheritors can sell, and they won't pay taxes. And so she seems to not be clicking that this is the case, which is unfortunate since that's what I was communicating in my very first post. And no, capital gains are not income. She's just reinstating the claim, not making a new argument. And yet, any person can use assets to borrow money, not just rich people. And that's true. But, regular people, the vast majority of their income is in their job, which they already pay taxes on. Well, the wealthy, the vast majority is not. It's a capital gains, which is a lot of that they don't have to pay taxes on. And so it's not equivalent. For the super wealthy, a whole lot of their income they don't have to pay taxes on. Well, for the regular person, they do. Also, you got to have money to take a nice loan. I mean, so if you have a really small portfolio, you're not going to get that much of a loan because you don't have that much collateral. I'd also think the interest rate would be lower. If you have tons of collateral, a lot more portfolio, which a wealthy person will have, you could get a lower interest rate for the same size loan. Anyways, and I responded, the wealthy pay money on 401ks, but there are limits on how much you can put in a 401k in a year. So they have most of their money outside of 401ks. You have to have valuable assets to borrow on it, and only a wealthy person has enough assets to play this trick without the high risk of not being able to pay the loan back. So yeah, that's another point I didn't think of right there. If you have less money, yeah, you could take loans on it, but if you screw up and can't pay it back, your portfolio doesn't have much room for error if you're super wealthy. So that's a much bigger risk. Anyways, my focus is on the wealthy because regular people make most of the money from jobs where they pay taxes, while wealthy people make tons of money on capital gains and are able to use those gains to spend without ever paying a tax on the income. Capital gains are income. You can use the gains to borrow against to effectively spend the gains tax-free. Knowing you have those gains, you can more freely spend other money. Inheritors can sell those gains without anyone ever paying a tax. And she said capital gain is not income, taxes are for income. Okay, that's just her restating things. Yeah. Oops, I clicked something weird on my other screen and now I'm confused. Okay, so that was the end of that conversation. This is what I saw this a lot. When a lot of people see me talking about this, they think about themselves. They're not thinking about the super wealthy, they're thinking about themselves, especially if they're older. They maybe have done okay, they have a decent little portfolio, they think this is about them, and the truth is, it's not about them. Because any tax I would put on it would have a high threshold, so it wouldn't affect them at all. And if it did affect them, unless they're super wealthy, it's not going to affect them very much because most of their money will be under the threshold. So it's not about them, but people see this and they just think about themselves, which, hey, is selfish. Very selfish. You should be thinking about what's best for the country, not you. But also, it's usually actually not bad for them. They just don't realize it. And, it doesn't click when I'm actually telling them. But anyways, all right. So I had one other conversation on this, and then we'll end this stream. Might do another one today. We'll see. But this was a more friendly conversation, although it is a little tougher for me to deal with because he's proposing an idea that, frankly, I don't have a really strong opinion of it, even though I guess I'm overall skeptical. But okay, so Joseph here says, we need a minimum tax, no loopholes on high income. I suggest over $500,000. It should be on the entire income, including unrealized gains. We pay income tax on unrealized interest in savings accounts. Okay, so what he's proposing here, there's two different names for it. One of them I'm not thinking of, but it's a mark-to-market tax. It's basically where you have a yearly tax on unrealized capital gains. And so you have some art pieces, you have a house, you have stocks, you have other investments. They go up in value. The amount they go up in value, you are taxed every year. And his suggestion, only the gains over $500,000. I assume he means yearly. $500,000. So I'm not for that in general. The problem with unrealized capital gains, which, by the way, I talk about this in my piece, and I researched it, and it's going to be probably talked about more here, but for better than I'm talking about it here, although I know some people actually just prefer a live ramble than they do, reading a piece. But I did talk about that there, and but I'll just try to top ahead. Some problems with a mark-to-market tax, taxing unrealized gains every year. I can think of two top ahead. One is you got to come up with the money for it. And so if you have $10 million and it grows to 11 million, which means you are over 500,000. So now you have a 500,000 gain that is now taxable to the new loophole minimum. You now owe money from that, but you don't have the money. It's all in assets. And so now you're in so some people might have other income streams, so they can just pay it with the other income streams. But maybe they may have had that other income streams assigned to do other things. And so you might be in a situation whether you had the income stream assigned to other things or you don't have other income streams, where now to pay the tax, you have to sell assets. So now you're forced to sell assets just to pay this tax. And that's not ideal, and it's not really efficient economically to have to do that. Because, you have this investment and now you have to sell it for the pure purpose of selling it or for paying the tax. And now if it's a stock, that's probably not that big of a deal because you can always you could just sell enough of stock in order to pay the tax. But for other things, like not a stock, like whether it's a business or like a farm or artwork or a house, other assets, well, you can't just sell a piece of it. And so now you got to have a system where you either have to take a loan to pay it, or a system where you can pay it over time, or some sort of system to pay it, and all those are going to be problematic. It's all doable. People have thought of clever ways to deal with it, but none of it's ideal. And so that's one major problem, is that just because when you have an unrealized capital gain, you don't actually have the cash, and so you force people to sell or take some sort of loan or something like that just to pay the tax. Another problem I fear is that, so the stock market, yes, the vast majority of the stock market is held by people who are really wealthy. But the stock market's really big. And even if you're someone who makes an average amount of money, you can actually build up over time a really nice little stock portfolio. And that can be really important for your retirement. And I would fear, because the easiest thing that's going to be taxed by his proposed tax is going to be stocks. And you'll be better able to hide it in other things like artwork or other things like that. I don't know, baseball cards, probably not baseball cards. Artwork is kind of the classic example, so it's the one that's coming to my head. But there's there's other assets that are much harder to appraise, much harder to find, and they're going to be better able to hide from the government. And so I fear that the super wealthy will move a lot of their money away from stocks into better hidden assets. And if you do that, it's going to weaken the stock market, which is going to hurt regular people. Because the stock market is really a key thing for regular people, especially in the United States, where it's basically built into our retirement system. And so I do fear that would hurt regular people by having the super wealthy not be as invested in the stock market. Super important text. I'm an important man. Anyways, and so I don't favor what he's proposing because of that, but I'm of course sympathetic that he's trying to get rid of all loopholes. But the problem is it's on unrealized capital gains, and how I would get unrealized capital gains is another way. I would do two things. I have two major proposals, both of which are in my piece here, which has a written and audio version, by the way. And none of these I made up. I got these ideas from economists who have thought about this and have even more detailed explanations than I provide here. I provide really a general overview here. But so I would do two things. One is I would get rid of the estate tax and turn it into an inheritance tax. I would do that for two reasons. One, because the estate tax has so many holes, but also because essentially the federal government is primarily an income tax system. And so let's just keep it as an income tax system. Estate tax is actually a wealth tax, a one-time wealth tax at death. Let's do it an inheritance tax. And so if you inherit money over a certain amount, I wouldn't do it over a pretty high amount. So if you inherit just a little bit of money, don't worry about it. But if you inherit tons of money, the amount over a certain amount, so not any under a certain amount. It might be like $1 million, might be 5 million, I don't know. But let's say it's 2 million. So every dollar you inherit in a lifetime over 2 million counts as your regular income tax. So you get rid of the state tax, but if you inherit something, you pay tax on it. And I agree, this should have absolutely no loopholes in it. It should just be nope, there's no way to get around it. Any sort of trust or anything needs to be made illegal if it helps you get around that. The other thing I would do, so that's actually not to even solve the problem I have here. That's just to be consistent. Hey, we're going to tax income. When you inherit money from your father or anyone else, that's a new income. And so you pay tax on that over a certain amount of money, over a certain amount. So you can inherit a big chunk and not pay tax on it. I'll talk about why I would do that in a minute, because I do it for the other thing too. So that's the first. I would replace the state tax with inheritance tax. The second thing I would do is I would make death a realization event. A realization event is an event where we count all your assets as realized. And so, again, I would only do this for the lifetime unrealized gains over a certain high value. Maybe 2 million, maybe 3 million, maybe 5 million. You don't want to make it too high, but you want it to be decently high. And so, okay, you have all these lifetimes of capital gains that you never paid taxes on, and you die, and we go, well, all right, death is a realization event. You owe us the money. Obviously, your estate will then owe the money for that. And then your inheritors, once they inherit the money, and it'll probably happen all at once, will also owe money for what they inherit. And so, that solves the problem. Instead of having all this income unrealized, but that is real income and you can really use that you never pay taxes on, you do, and you do it at death. And the reason you do it at death is that it's just the simplest time to do it. It's not just that it's simplest. It's that it does the least damage to the economy. Wealth tax, I do talk about wealth tax in this piece. I'm not getting into it now, but I think wealth taxes have problems. I think a mark-to-market, meaning a yearly tax on unrealized gains, has problems. And of course, there's no such thing as a tax that doesn't have problems. All taxes have problems. But I think the tax with the least problems that will get at this untaxed, unrealized gain problem is at death. One thing, it limits different incentives you might have to try to hide it because you're dead. And it's at a point where, you're forced to sell it. Well, something's happening anyways, okay? So you're going to be forced to do if there's a big transfer anyway, so while that's happening, we'll go ahead and also figure out how to pay the tax. If it is a situation where actually you have this huge inheritance, but it's all on a big piece of property. Obviously, we don't want to have to sell you a piece of the property. There would be a system set up where you could pay it over time in that situation. But rather than have to deal with that every year, like you would in a mark-to-market tax, you deal with it one time. And the same thing with the valuation. So you got to evaluate paintings, and all these other types of assets that aren't clearly evaluated. Like stocks, we know what taxes are worth, what the stocks are worth, because they're calculated by the stock market, you know. But all these other things, it's hard to know what exactly they're worth. You have to do that for every asset every American owns every year under this system, but and get it exacting enough to do a tax. But you only have to do it, well, once in a person's life. Otherwise, with tax on death, because that's the only time you need to tax it. So anyway, I've sort of lost track of what I was even talking about. But yeah, that's what I would do to get at this. Get rid of the state tax, replace inheritance tax, and do death as a realization event, where essentially you tax the gains then. Oh, I did want to mention why there's a certain barrier, because you could think, wait, why is there a high barrier? If we do income tax on everyone, shouldn't the inheritance tax be on every dollar you inherited? And shouldn't the realized gain be on every dollar? And the unrealized gain at death as a realization, be on every dollar someone made? And so here's why I would only do it above a certain threshold. Because both of these are essentially death taxes. I'm using the propaganda term, but it's also accurate. They're taxes that occur at death. Technically, one is at inheritance, but the inheritance happens because someone died, you know. By the way, the inheritance would also be a gift. It would be gift and inheritance total lifetime. But anyways, and so you have these two death taxes, inheritances and death as a realization event. And man, someone just died. Now you got to deal with this tax thing. That, to me, remember how I talked about you want to tax and fund your government, but in a way that's the least damaging to society. Well, it's pretty damaging to have to deal with a big tax right when someone died, unless you got tons of money, because you can just pay someone to do that for you. You either can just, well, soak it up and do it yourself, or suck it up, or, you know, for the super wealthy, you just pay someone to do it for you. And it's going to be a lot easier even when you're dealing with a death. And so that's one reason it's a lot easier to deal with when you're super wealthy, because you can pay someone to do it. Not to mention, if you're really wealthy, you could more easily just take time off to do it yourself. And secondly, well, because the amount of money not being taxed, essentially cheating everyone else, is a lot greater. And so when you have a really large inheritance and when you have a really large amount of unrealized gains, well, at that point, you're cheating the government, you're cheating society a lot more than someone who has less. And so at that point, we're like, all right, we let you get away with a lot, but now we've got to crack down and not just let you essentially take all that, legally steal all that money from everyone else, since everyone else is paying a tax on their income, their work income. All right. All right. Well, anyway, this is what I sent to him. I think there are some difficulties with taxing unrealized gains. I think it'd be less damaging to have death as a realizing event for those who have made a certain level of gains in their life and on gains over that same number. I'd also get rid of the estate tax and replace with inheritance tax for people who have a certain level of lifetime inheritances and on inheritances over that number. He said, thanks. I have to admit, I did not understand everything in your reply. I don't know why I'm giving him this accent, but however, I'd like your thoughts on why a tax on unrealized capital gains is different from tax on unrealized savings and checking interest. So this is kind of an interesting question. So if you have a bank, you can have a checking account, you can have a savings account, they earn some interest. That interest is treated like regular income, and you have to pay taxes on it every year. Now, why is this different? I think the big difference is you're actually getting straight cash. Like with an unrealized gain, you don't actually have money to pay it unless you sell it, in which case you're going to be forced to sell just to pay the tax. Not ideal. But with an interest and checking account, no, you actually have the money. It's right there. So you just save a percentage of that money, that interest you got, and you pay it. Which, by the way, dividends are also taxed, which is why there's more stock buybacks now than there were dividends, because stock buybacks should increase capital gains, and dividends should increase capital gains, which have nice tax treatment, while dividends you have to pay taxes on right away. And so over time, big corporations focus more on stock buybacks rather than paying out dividends just to, save on taxes. Anyways, your checking interest point is interesting because they are similar. One big difference is that taxes on bank interest can easily be paid by that interest. The interest is directly paid in cash, so you can use a portion of that interest to pay the taxes. With a stock or land or painting, these can raise in value, making you wealthier, but it produces no cash for you to pay the tax unless you sell it. So unless you have other income sufficient to pay the tax, you are forced to sell just to pay it. Taxing unrealized gains also means needing to have evaluations for all assets every year, which requires more bureaucracy. It also gives people an incentive to hide their wealth in assets not actually as valuable, misallocating capital. Yeah, that's another thing I missed earlier, a problem with an unrealized gain. If you are moving, because I mentioned, but not this part of it, if you are buying more paintings and property instead of stocks, simply because you think you can better hide from taxes, well, that means instead of putting it where the money can do the most work for the economy, for the world, for people, you're putting it where, the most efficient place to put it economically. You're just putting it where you think you could better skip taxes. And that's not ideal, and that has impacts that would hurt a lot of people. Okay, if this leads to wealthy focusing more on private investments where the average person can't invest, this could make regular people's investments less profitable. Anyone with even a little money can invest in the stock market, but stocks won't grow much in value if the wealthy flee them in fear of taxes. The government would try to tax everything, so there would be no hiding, but it'd be hard to do this successfully and require a lot of bureaucracy. There'd also be complications in what to do in years that assets are down. Last time I checked, there was no country that taxed the growth of all assets like this, so there could also be unexpected challenges. Yeah, so I mean, these are not easy things to be done. They can be done, but they're hard. And if it's something that's big and hard, there's probably going to be hiccups and challenges that you're not expecting. Especially if no one's done it before, or not very many people have done it before, so you don't have their experiences to learn from. And so you're going to hit a lot of pitfalls that are hard to predict, actually, because it hasn't been done before, and it's complicated enough where you can't predict everything. There'd also be complications what to do in years that assets are down. Last time I checked, there was no country that taxed the growth of all assets like this, so there could be unexpected challenges. I said that. So like I said, when assets are down, does the government give you money? If the taxes went up, if your assets went up a whole bunch one year and you pay a big tax on it, but then they go way down, do you get a tax refund? Or do you just wait till you go past the last amount, the last peak that you already paid taxes on? Well, those are things you have to figure out. I do think we can tax these gains, and I believe the most efficient way is to take the taxes at death. So when a wealthy person dies, we count up their unrealized capital gains and tax it then before moving on to inheritances. And I decided just to share this. Did I forget that I already shared it here because that's what we were commenting on? I may have forgotten that. That's very well possible. Thanks again. You seem to be very knowledgeable in this field, and I'm glad you decided to reply to my comment. I am learning a lot from you. I understand the problem with non-cash assets? I think it meant non-cash assets. However, stocks could be easily turned to cash by selling a few shares. As far as wealthy people staying away from the stock market to avoid taxes, this is Wall Street's problem. I believe that the higher return in and the ease of converting it to cash will still be luring them to keep at least part of their money there. In any case, I would like to hear your opinion on the 5% minimum no loopholes tax I recommend. Okay, I don't know why I was doing this accent like that, but so that as far as well as staying, that's Wall Street's problem. Again, it's not Wall Street's problem because it's our problem. It makes people who don't have access to the special investments that wealthy people can hide in. It makes your ability to grow your money a lot less, so it hurts everyone. So the stock market is easy for everyone to take part in, even people with just a little money to invest. And even so, he said he believes we'll keep at least part of their money there. But yeah, if if a substantial part leaves, that still substantially hurts the stock market and means hurts regular people's wealth and ability to grow their wealth. In any case, I would like to hear your opinion on a 5% minimum, no loopholes tax I recommend. And so I think he's referring to the one he mentioned at the beginning. He didn't say 5%, but it includes unrealized. So I was kind of already responding to that, basically as in, well, no, I disagree with it because I don't think a yearly unrealized tax makes sense. So in that way, I don't agree with it. I'm pretty sure when I responded, I forgot that we're talking about an unrealized tax, which means I responded to saying I more agreeing than I actually am, not on purpose, because I think I forgot that he's talking about unrealized gain. We'll see. I think you were saying we should have a 5% income tax on all incomes over $500,000 that have to be paid no matter what. I haven't thought a lot about that, but as a backstop, I suppose I would support it. Ideally, it wouldn't be needed because we wouldn't have so many loopholes and we could have a higher rate than 5%. You'd have to make sure the no loophole tax really did not have loopholes because people would lobby to get loopholes in the new loophole tax. So yeah, that's the thing. Anytime you're going to say, hey, no loopholes, is it really going to be no loopholes? Because that's going to go through a democratic process. It's going to go through Congress. There's going to be a lot of lobbying. And is it really going to be no loopholes? And even if there's no loopholes on time one when you pass it, what about 5 years from now? What about 10 years from now? Because that lobbying is not going to stop. But Congress is always going to be there at the ear to the people who could benefit. And while no one else is looking, they'll add loopholes. So, I mean, obviously, that's true for anything, though, not just what he's saying. But you got to be ever vigilant. Ever vigilant. Even if it did not have loopholes initially, people would find or create loopholes 5 or 10 years down the line. So it wouldn't be a simple solution because politics doesn't end the moment it passes. So I suppose I would support it as a backstop, but ideally we'd have a more comprehensive system. So I said that forgetting he's referring to unrealized gains. I'm not for taxing unrealized gains. So if that's part of the plan, then actually I don't agree with this plan for that reason. Now, if it was not unrealized gains and there's just so many loopholes, and you want to make sure there's at least some way to tax, I don't know if I'm 100% against an idea of having some sort of backstop. Basically, you'd have to convince me that, yeah, we can't get the ideal tax system through, but for some reason we can get this through, and it will at least make it a little more fair for people who are able to essentially legally cheat on certain income. But again, that's only if it's realized gains. So I'm not actually for a yearly tax on unrealized gains. I don't get me wrong, I think it could be doable, but I think it'd be less damaging to the economy and better overall just to do a death as a realization event and get the gains then. Okay, and he said, I considered you'd have to make sure items before I started advocating for it. That is why I put the no loopholes in uppercase. If it raises more real, not tariff money for 5 or 10 years, it will make it harder for politicians to mess with. Today's loopholes for the rich is one of the reasons the government has to raise the debt limit every so often. Yeah, well, at this point here, money for 5, it may make it harder for politicians to mess with. Probably not, because so who's hurt if you have this for 5 or 10 years and then someone puts in a loophole? Everyone is hurt. Everyone is hurt a little bit because the government now is in deeper debt or has to raise more taxes on everyone else because a certain group of people got a loophole. Everyone is hurt, but everyone's hurt a little bit, and they don't really notice it. However, the people that benefit, they might make billions of dollars from a nice loophole, or at least millions. They notice a lot, and so they're really focused, trying really hard at getting Congress to pass it. And Congress might put it as an attachment to some other bill that no one's really paying attention to. A few journalists might write a few articles. Very few people read it. You won't even know what happens when the loophole's put through. So fortunately, I think the loophole thing, and that's with all tax systems, not just his, of course. But they say, hey, I'm making a no loophole tax. Well, they should all be no loophole tax systems. So anyways, yeah, I think that's still going to be a problem. And I don't think it's going to get put in concrete after it survives for 10 years. I think there's still going to be people with a heavy interest to get a loophole put in. And I think most people won't even notice if the loophole is put in, unfortunately. But in theory, having a backstop, the no loopholes, I guess, could possibly help. But I'd rather focus on actually just getting a better system overall. And part of that would mean closing a bunch of the loopholes. Let's see. Oh, well, that's it. All right. So that was the reply guy with Lone Candle. I want you guys to like me. I want you guys to comment me. I want you guys to love me. End stream.